Hello and welcome to the Stone Federation of Great Britain's presentation on selecting the correct stone. Natural stone has been used successfully for a variety of internal and external applications for thousands of years. The aim of this presentation is to assist you in being able to make the correct decisions when selecting a natural stone for your project. My name is David Richardson. I'm chair of the Stone Federation's Technical Committee, and I'm also an independent natural stone consultant. I've been involved in a large number of projects where selecting the stone has become important, and this is in projects that are both in the UK and worldwide. The Stone Federation of Great Britain is the trade association for the natural stone industry. It provides a wide range of services and resources for its members. This presentation has been compiled to give you what we consider to be the recommended stone selection process. It's been endorsed by some of the country's leading stone consultants and the associated quarries and mines. It's important to begin the selection process at that design concept stage. Early selection should provide the means by which you will get a successful natural stone selection for your project. We would consider that the stone selection process can be broken down into 5 key stages, as have been identified in the slide in front of you. The first stage, stage A, is to research potential stones. Stage B, the second stage, is wherever possible to do a quarry, mine and/or factory visit. Stage C is the main technical assessment. Although aspects of this may have been carried out in stage A, this is the point at which detailed technical assessment of the stone would be carried out. The fourth stage, or stage D, is a review of built examples of the material that you're intending to use. And then finally, stage 5, or stage E, is to complete the project specification. This finalises all the work that you've done in the preceding 4 stages and is a crucial part to ensure the selection of the stone is actually correct and all the stages have been completed. So the first stage, step A, is carrying out research into the potential stones that you intend to use. It's possible that the list may be quite long at this stage as you're trying to understand what stones offer the best value and aesthetic to the project. The source of the stone is quite important and has implications for the rest of the project in terms of the ethical credentials of the stone and pricing and the availability of technical properties and/or replacement materials. There are a range of questions, as are identified in this slide, that you should be asking and trying to generate answers to. It's important at this stage to even consider a preliminary technical assessment. Make certain that the basic properties of the stone are likely to match the project requirements. And also, wherever possible, find out where that stone may have been used previously to match up with the requirements, again, of your actual project. Although these aspects will be looked at in more detail in later stages of the selection process. It's becoming increasingly important for many clients to understand where the stone that's going to be used on their project has been sourced from. And from this perspective, it's important to understand that the ethical credentials of the stone are as sound as possible. Those sourcing the stone have a responsibility to try and understand what the quarry's approach to sustainability of that material is, and in addition, what their health and safety procedures are. Nobody wants materials that are associated with damage or detriment to either people or the environment. You may ask, how is it possible to establish the ethical credentials of a stone material? Well, Stone Federation Great Britain has actually come up with one possible solution to this, which is the Ethical Stone Register. The ESR is a sector-specific ethical and responsible sourcing scheme for natural stone. It was created largely in response to the Modern Slavery Act in 2015, but it allows people to understand the credentials plus the general sustainability procedures that are operated by a company. It is very common at that preliminary stage of selecting a material that you're provided with what's described as an indicative sample. Quite often, these are small, coaster-sized pieces of stone that give you an indication of the likely appearance of a stone. These samples may only be 10 centimetres by 10 centimetres squared, and so they're relatively small, and while they may show the general colour of a sample or a stone, they may not give you a full appreciation of the texture and the general geological characteristics of that material. We would always advise that samples of a much greater size and a better reflection of the actual stone to be used are examined. And we'll look at this with regards to range samples and a more detailed examination of the stone later in this talk. It's also important to understand the actual name and type of stone and any commercial names under which it's traded. It's important to understand accurately which quarry it comes from and which country is the source of origin, as sometimes different names are used or the same name for the stone from a different source. This slide simply shows some examples of indicative samples and how their relatively small size could impact on the likely characteristics of stones that you may be trying to select for your project. It's unlikely that all natural stones will be consistent in their colour, tone and appearance, with different features appearing in many of the different stones and colour tone being quite variable. If you want consistent materials, then it's important to try and understand and establish that at the very beginning. The green coloured stone in the top left shows some faint banding and more distinct darker coloured bands of the stone material itself. This is a natural feature within the stone and should not be considered a defect or a problem with it. In the lower two examples, there's evidence of some mineral accumulations and some banding and veining. These are all perfectly natural features of the stone, and from the look of these materials are something that should be expected. Now, it may be that these features need to be controlled or eliminated from the finished product, but that would have to be a discussion with the actual fabricator to see whether it's feasible or possible for them to be excluded in the actual supplied material. Exclusion of features could well have an impact on the actual cost of the material that's going to be supplied. Any indicative samples supplied should ideally have the actual surface finish that the project is intending to use shown as well. This slide shows how the same stone can change its appearance depending on the type of surface finish that is applied to it. Using the honed sample in the middle as the benchmark, where it shows the darker colour tones of this material, you can see that any form of texturing tends to lighten the material, which is quite a common feature for any darker coloured stone. So sandblasting, for instance, which may be required to give the required slip finish, significantly lightens the appearance of that stone. And this is something that design teams must recognise in the selection of their materials, as there could be a colour contrast that wasn't intended or required. Since 2013, it's been a legal requirement for most stones used in the majority of applications to have CE marking documentation provided with them. CE marking will remain in place until December 2021, when it will become fully replaced by UK CA marking. Largely, this will be almost the same as CE marking, just with a different change in title. And in both situations, the information provided is a passport for the stone to be used, showing its technical properties. It is, however, not a fitness for purpose statement, and it's important that the information presented in a declaration of performance is understood and interpreted. As was said in the previous slide, as from January 2022, then UK CA marking will become the dominant technical information passport for natural stone. But it's important to reiterate the point made previously. UKCA marking, CE marking provides information about the stone, but it is not a fitness for purpose statement. It's important that the information presented is assessed and interpreted by somebody that understands the results that are shown. This slide simply provides an example of how a CE marking document and a declaration of performance could look. It provides details of the actual stone, the quarry source, and the various tests against which that stone has been tested and the values that are provided. It's not necessary for all testing characteristics to have test data, and it's possible that there will be no value declared in some situations. As part of any preliminary assessment, the declaration of performance information is a very good starting point. We'll talk about this later, but it becomes important that in some situations more detailed or additional testing is actually carried out. It may be that the existing stone has detailed technical information available in the form of technical reports. These are always useful to review as well, providing they're in date and of relevance to the material to be supplied to the project. Our second step, or step B, is the visit to the quarry, mine and/or factory. Quite frequently, a factory will be on the same site as the quarry or mine. Quarry visits can actually be quite time and resource intensive, and so it would be typical to only carry these out for a much shorter number of stones in your selection process. It wouldn't be common to do 4, 5 or more quarry visits. It would normally be done when the shortlist is down to maybe 1 or 2 stones. The quarry visit allows the opportunity for you to look at the working faces, to look at the material, the colour, the presence of any fractures or discontinuities within the material, and how these could have an impact on the delivered stone for the project. It gives you a chance to look at the blocks. For instance, there's no point having slab requirements or cut to size piece requirements for a project when you see that the blocks themselves are typically of a size that wouldn't allow the required module sizes to actually be achieved. This visit allows you the opportunity to view, and often in coordination with the client and his representatives, agree the range in the appearance of the stone that you want for the project. It's always important to create and agree the range and document this in a report wherever possible. The maximum benefit from a range report comes when it's included as part of the contract documents. In addition to looking at the geological characteristics of the stone, the quarry visit also allows you to understand the environmental impacts, any sustainable or ethical and responsible sourcing issues for that stone, and it gives you the opportunity to gauge the scale and speed of the operation. So it gives you greater confidence, hopefully, that the material and the volume of material you require for your project can be delivered and supplied on time to meet your requirements. It's not uncommon now to find that many natural stones are mined rather than quarried in the more traditional fashion. This slide is an example of Albion Stone's Portland Stone mine on the Isle of Portland itself. It's important to remember that different beds within a quarry can have a different appearance and different characteristics, both from a colour, tone and texture perspective. It's always useful to have a geological specialist with you to advise and to give you additional information about how that stone is extracted and the relevant appearance and other characteristics of the stone that will be generated. In stage A of the selection process, we spoke about indicative samples, which tend to be relatively small and perhaps not be totally reflective of the actual stone that's being going to be supplied for a project. At the quarry, it should be possible to see range or control samples, much larger samples that are going to be truly reflective of the material that you require. In fact, we would consider important and a responsibility of the quarry or the mine or stone supplier to actually provide those samples that truly reflect the actual geology of the stone that's going to be supplied and the full range of material that's available. Ultimately, we'd be looking to achieve sign-off of agreed reference samples to ensure that the supply of the material that you want is going to be consistent with your chosen aesthetic requirements. Ideally, a good quarry will actually provide you with range control samples on the site. These will be boards, as are shown here, which are reflective of the current production material. Here again, we're looking at an example of Portland stone with boards, range boards showing the current production material from a range of different beds within the quarry. All the material shown within those boards is reflective of material that would be supplied if you chose that particular bed. As part of a contract, it's quite normal to request and specify the use of range control samples. You will require sufficient of these to be reflective of the material that you intend to use. These must be much larger than those smaller indicative coaster size samples that you may have looked at the beginning of the project. And it's not unusual to ask for 10 larger stones, nominally 600 by 400 millimeters in size, or at least to ask for range control samples of the common sizes intended for use on the project. Those control samples must be sufficient to show all the expected impacts of tonal and textural changes in the stone that's to be supplied and any particular geological variations of that material. As was mentioned earlier, during the quarry visit, it's possible, or it should be possible, to see blocks of extracted material. These are useful in that they will often give you a good indication of the actual slab sizes or effectively module sizes that are achievable with that material. If you look closely, the two blue parallel lines marked onto the blocks are also indicative of the direction of bedding of that material. Again, important to look at these features to see how consistent they are within a stone when you're at that preliminary selection phase and understanding of how that material will look and likely perform. A quarry visit will often give you an indication of the rates of extraction of material from that quarry, or at the very least, it will give you the opportunity to ask the quarry operator about their rates of extraction. It will allow you the opportunity to compare the different sizes of blocks that might be being produced, and as I've said previously, to compare those to the stone sizes required for the project. At some quarries, significant quantities of material are quarried in advance, and so it's possible to view and actually secure that pre-quarried material for your project. And so it's possible, in discussion with the quarry operator, to consider a block pre-purchase scheme. Pre-purchase of material clearly removes any concerns about supply of the material throughout the duration of your project. The factory or processing works is often sited very close to the quarry itself, and it gives you the opportunity to view the stone going from the quarried material through to the processed and then cut to size stone product that you're after. As in any production process, quality is of the paramount importance. To improve confidence in the quality management procedures in operation at any company, but in particular at quarries and factories associated with the production of natural stone, you should ask for evidence of their ISO 9001 quality management system, or at the very least to see if they're operating procedures that are in line with that sort of approach. The factory visit also gives you the opportunity to look at the further processing of the material, the cutting, the polishing, the honing of the material. It also gives you that additional insight into the geological characteristics of the material. As the material finish is improved and you move through from honed to polished surfaces, you can see much more detail about the actual stone, its colour, texture and appearance. The third main step in the stone selection process is step C, or the detailed technical assessment. This detailed technical assessment stage follows on from any preliminary technical assessment that may have been carried out at step A in this process, where perhaps provisional or early technical data was reviewed, sometimes just in the form of the DOP or other technical data that may be generally made available for that stone. At this stage, however, it's important that a more detailed assessment is made to look at the properties of the stone with regards to the proposed application. It may be, for instance, that in earlier stages of the work, certain stone test data wasn't available. Those gaps should be filled at this stage and additional testing carried out where required. The amount of additional testing that may be required will largely depend on the history of use of the stone and what's known about it, where and how it's been used previously. Depending on the scale of the project and the actual quantity of stone that's required, it may also be important to carry out production control testing to ensure that the quality of the stone throughout the supply of the project is maintained. As raised previously, the DOP for a stone is a very good starting point when looking at making a technical assessment of its properties. The DOP itself should be no more than 2 years old. It is possible that some of the data that's contained within it could be slightly older than that, but the signed and dated document presented as the DOP should be no more than 2 years old, in my opinion. If necessary, ask for the technical reports upon which the DOP has been developed, and these may give you a greater insight into the actual performance of the stone and possibly some additional data. It may give you the opportunity to look at range of values and how stone failures in different tests could have occurred. And just as a reminder, as of January 22, this data, in the terms of a declaration of performance, will be a UKCA document rather than CE marking. As I've raised earlier, in a lot of instances, simply looking at the use of a stone in previous applications and looking at the declaration of performance data may be sufficient. However, that's not necessarily always the case. There are upwards of 30 different European stone tests that are relevant to natural stone that could be used. Declarations of performance will normally only contain results from about a key 6 to 8 different tests for the stone. And it's important that you have to consider the different stones for the proposed application. A good example of this may be where you're considering a natural stone for use as external paving, because in this situation you may well on the declaration of performance have information about slip resistance or abrasion resistance or strength. However, don't forget that in certain applications that stone may have to be resistant to de-icing salts, and it may not always be the case that a test appropriate for testing that stone's performance with regards to the impact of de-icing salts has been presented. And so that would be one test that you'd be looking to reproduce prior to confirming the selection of that material. Similarly, in internal applications, testing that demonstrate a stone is suitable for swimming pool linings or the surrounds to swimming pools is actually quite a challenge. And a standard declaration of performance may not give you all the information you require. And so some additional tests that are available from within those 30 different tests that are out there may be required. Always speak to a stone specialist and they can guide you through that process and the selection of the appropriate stone methodologies. Of all those tests that are out there, they can actually be gathered into 5 main test groups. The first group are the index tests. These are those tests that identify the stone and give you its baseline characteristics. The second group are the strength tests. This would typically be either compressive strength or flexural strength. The third grouping are durability tests. These are often accelerated tests that look to replicate methods by which the stone could deteriorate in a laboratory environment. The fourth group are safety tests, and that would include things like slip resistance. And finally, there's a fifth group, which are component tests, which are looking at testing that stone as part of a system to see whether or not it's going to be appropriate for use. And a good example for that would be impact resistance of a cladding system. It's important that the correct standard is adopted for the correct application of the stone. So whether it's being used as thin stone cladding, as more traditional masonry, as paving, or as internal flooring, ensure that the correct standard is adopted and followed, and this will give advice and guidance on testing characteristics and performance. For external cladding, the standard to refer to is BS 8298. This actually comes in 4 main parts at the moment. The part 5, which will deal with internal linings, is in the process of being written at present and should be available in approximately the next 12 months or so. For external paving, the most relevant standard would probably be BS 1341. This provides guidance also on how to calculate the required thickness for a stone paving unit, and it gives advice and guidance with regards to different classes of trafficking in different applications of use. This slide is taken from BS 8298 for cladding, but as an example of how the balance needs to be struck between available information in terms of testing data and the history of use. And it shows quite simply how the amount of testing that will be required increases where less information is known about that stone. Where further testing beyond that presented in a declaration of performance is required, it would normally be a combination of initial and production control testing. Firstly, we'll discuss the initial testing. That initial testing would normally be carried out if the design warrants further testing to establish characteristics of the preferred stone that are not included within the declaration of performance and are not available from the supplier by means of another or additional test report, or if the stone has little or no history of being used in a similar application and environment to that which you're going to adopt. Wherever possible, it would always be advised that the selection of samples for the initial testing should be carried out by a stone specialist, and that you don't just rely on materials supplied by the quarry itself. This ensures greater confidence that the material that's tested is reflective of the material that's going to be delivered for the project itself. Production control testing is designed to give improved confidence about the quality of the stone that's going to be supplied throughout the duration of the project. As such, the production control testing samples should be started just before the key first blocks to be cut for the production for the project to ensure that all material from start through to end is consistent with the initial test data that you have. The amount of regular testing that's required throughout the supply will be dependent on the size of the project and the nature of the stone, but should be designed to be consistent throughout that project supply process. The fourth step in our natural stone selection process, or step D, is the building inspection. This gives you the opportunity to use past experience to your benefit for the current project. And it's an opportunity to look at where a natural stone has been used before and how it's performed. So best to look at a material that's used in the same application in the same environment wherever possible. Suppliers should be able to give you examples of where their material has been used previously, and it's good to look back as far as possible to get a good appreciation of how that material will perform. While this stage has been identified as the fourth step in the process, it is quite useful to actually look for examples as early on in the project selection process as possible and not to leave this to the last action. That's because it helps inform the whole design and selection process. It gives you a much greater understanding of how the stone is likely to weather and age. But of course, you have to ensure that the material that you're looking at in the current production material is also similar in appearance and texture, etc., to the material that was being quarried that period of time ago, which could be 5, 10 or 20 years maybe, and materials will change and vary, so have that confidence and assurance wherever possible that the material you're looking at in the past application is similar to that you're examining in the current application. Looking and identifying those stones that have performed well in your given application and environment should significantly improve confidence that the material that you're going to use will perform well. You have to remember that stone durability tests are only accelerated laboratory tests that do their best to inform you as to how a stone is likely to perform. The best test is time itself and looking at how that stone has performed. So if you're going to use a stone for a project in London, look for where that stone has been used in London. Looking at how it's performed in Helsinki may give you a more extreme version of how that stone might perform. However, looking at how that stone may perform in, for example, Madrid may not necessarily again give you the same environment of application to make a fair judgment. If you've been able to follow the 4 steps that have been described in the talk so far, by now you should have selected a stone or maybe 2 stones to go on your preferred shortlist. This would be your first choice material and potentially a backup. It should, for any reason, that preferred first choice material no longer be available. Ideally, you would have visited the quarry or the mine or the supplier of the stone and had a good look at the wider range of material and better understood its geological characteristics, and that material will be suited to the project that you have in mind. You should also have been able to satisfy yourself that the environmental and ethical controls that are required by both you and your client are going to be satisfied. And at this stage, you should also have completed a technical assessment, which is likely to have included more than just a review of the declaration of performance information that you've been presented with. If the 4 earlier stages of the selection process have been carried out, that should position you well for step E, the 5th stage in the process, which is to complete the specification. Any specification should establish quite clearly the stone's source, its petrological name, or the detailed scientific name and type of the stone, and the preferred supplier or suppliers. It's important that the specification actually mentions the required technical properties of the stone itself, and that these are clearly established. You should make certain that the specification clearly mentions the relevant standards for the application of the stone that you intend to use. We would also recommend that you include the required ethical and sustainability sourcing credentials for the stone, as well as any other environmental and organisational management schemes that you require to help improve quality on the stone project itself. Writing a tight specification ensures that you minimise the opportunity for a lesser material to be introduced to the project. I have seen this happen on past occasions where clients have thought that they'd clearly established what stone was supposed to be supplied, only to find that at a very late stage another material is introduced to the project with lesser credentials and qualities, and this has led to significant problems. So pointers to help in completing the specification: remember, follow the guidance in the British standards, but also, where relevant, use assistance from the quarry or mine, because they will and should have information that would be useful to you. Ensure that the extraction and processing is in accordance with the method agreed, and also set out clearly in the specification the technical properties that are required as part of the design. And as I've said before, specify the quality and sourcing and ethical requirements that you and your client have for that material. And so, to summarise and to try to ensure that you follow an appropriate natural stone selection process, we would always recommend that initially you carry out research into the materials that you intend to use. Research the stone and make that initial selection, probably from indicative samples or from past history of use and a knowledge of that particular material. Wherever possible, visit the quarry or mine and look at existing buildings and select the stone with a good knowledge of the general geological characteristics and capabilities that it will have, and environmental sustainability and ethical sourcing credentials. Make certain that you assess the technical properties of the stone and incorporate those properties clearly and properly into the design. And finally, make certain that you encapsulate all of those previous points by writing a tight specification that ensures that you get the product that you want. The Stone Federation itself provides a wide range of resources that assist in that natural stone selection process, from a range of relevant publications through the British Stone Sourcing Map, the Architects Club, and also through being able to provide technical answering service if you email through into the technical advice line. The scope of the technical advice line is limited, and it can't deal with very detailed project inquiries. However, it's a good starting point if you have some slight concerns or queries about a stone and how it may be used, or even where to find one. The Stone Federation is the driving force behind the Ethical Stone Register. This is an important scheme that looks at the sustainability credentials of both companies and products as we move into the future with the supply of natural materials. The Ethical Stone Register, or ESR, is a sector-specific ethical and responsible sourcing scheme for natural stone. It was created as a response to the Modern Slavery Act, but it looks at all aspects of a company and a product to ensure that it's as sustainable and ethically secure as possible. The ESR allows companies of all sizes to offer ethical sourcing solutions to their clients. There are 6 key aspects that the ESR will actually cover. So, as it says on the tin, it covers ethical and responsible sourcing of a material. However, it digs further into the product and its production and looks at sustainability and carbon footprint. It also ensures that companies are doing their best to maintain health and safety legislation and recommendations within the environments that they operate. It looks at energy consumption. It looks at waste impacts and water management, and it tries to provide confidence around the areas of anti-corruption and anti-bribery. If you want to use the ESR, then the best thing to do is to go onto the website And here you'll see companies that are members of the scheme to be displayed alongside images of the stones that are included within their accreditation. The scheme itself operates at 3 different levels. At the lower level, tier 1 within the scheme, it's a self-declaration level where companies provide information about how they operate. The upper 2 tiers are independently audited, and we would consider they give greater levels of confidence to clients about the supply of those materials. The system itself makes it easy to compare companies, and it allows natural stone to be considered with regards to these key and essential elements of production and supply. For a long time now, Stone Federation has produced industry-specific guidance in relation to a number of key aspects. Perhaps one of the most popular documents that we've produced over the years is the Natural Stone Flooring Code of Practice. This can be accompanied sometimes by the slip resistance document, becoming increasingly important for a lot of the interior fit-out projects, but also the sister document to this presentation, which is the one on selecting the correct stone. We would always recommend that when you work with natural stone, you would choose a Stone Federation member. Members have a range of advantages that we would consider are associated with them over companies that are not part of the Federation. One of those highly important aspects is health and safety, and Stone Federation ensures that the health and safety associated with all its member companies is as high as can be possible. Training is also a key component of all members that are part of the Stone Federation. It's so vital that training is incorporated into those members of the teams that are starting to develop and grow. And so this is a key consideration when companies apply for membership of the Stone Federation. Thank you for your time listening to this presentation. We hope that it's been of benefit. However, should there be any queries or concerns about the process of selecting natural stone, please feel free to email technical@stonefed.org.uk, and we'll do our best to try and answer questions that you raise with us. Thank you again.